What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel for a Steam Deck video here with Warhammer Space Marine 2, a game I've really been anticipating and waiting for. I love the original over a decade ago, and I've really been having fun with this one on my PC and on GeForce Now, but getting into Steam Deck, it is a little rough. Settings-wise, we're just looking at 800p FSR2 balanced here, and we're going to have VSync turned off, motion blur is going to be off, and we are going to be on the low preset. And I've messed around with all kinds of settings in this game, and unfortunately, even though there are some areas that are serviceable in the 30s with decent enough frame times, a lot of this game is really in the unplayable area. Certainly walking around in your base area is no big deal. You'll have these times where you're going to dip down into the teens and eventually work your way back up depending on where you're at, or you might stay in the 20s depending if you're in another area, but it's not combat related and you can get away with it here. But out in the game when you're playing missions and stuff, you'll have some areas where there aren't too many enemies on screen, so even though the CPU is getting hit pretty hard and we're GPU bound in those areas as well, and we'll be in the 20s, it isn't a complete mess when it comes to the frame times and the performance, but I would consider this to be pushing it for playable for Space Marine here in an area like this. But a lot of this game takes place in really large battleground and areas with a lot of enemies, a lot of NPCs, and it's really happens a lot, especially later on into the next planet and more missions and stuff like that. This is still a lot of beginning areas where we're not even into some of the biggest battles, and we'll be down into the teens and 20s quite often with frame times that are just horrible to try to play with because we're getting more CPU bound here where we just can't push the frames to the GPU, and even at low frame rate at least stay smoother like we did in other areas. It just gets to be an absolute mess, and again it gets worse later on in later missions as well. So unfortunately for a majority of this game, it becomes a really unplayable experience where you're gonna have trouble staying alive and really enjoying the game on anything above something like easy, because it's going to be difficult with dodging, avoiding attacks, and doing that type of stuff. So in so many areas of this game where there's so much going on, I wouldn't say it's necessarily that the game's not optimized, because it's playing well on my 2060, 3060 PC and 4080 in the cloud without any issues. But on the lower end hardware, it's struggling, especially on the deck with the CPU limitations of that 4-core 8-thread that we have here. Again, some areas they'll smooth back out once the CPU is not completely maxed out. We become more GPU bound, but even those areas are going to be very low on FPS. And no matter what I do with settings and play around with it, it just stays pretty rough. So I don't think very many people would opt to get into that on the deck necessarily. But over here on GeForce Now cloud gaming, and I know that's not for everybody, but I use GeForce Now a ton, especially their ultimate 4080 tier here, and I have this at 800p still, but native with no upscale there, and on ultra maxed out settings across the board here instead of low. And for me here on Wi-Fi with my internet connection, it's a really smooth, good experience. We're really good on the ping here. We are capped to 60 FPS on the stream because it's browser on the deck still, so we can't get to that 120, but it's a really smooth, pretty stable 60 FPS. And I would normally lock the game down to 60 as well to keep it super smooth on the screen, but I wanted to leave it unlocked to see what we had for frame rate here. And even if we were getting to some really busy areas of the game, and if it were dipping below 60 for any reason, we needed to work on that. We're already at ultra native, so there's plenty of room to play around there and keep the game at 60 lock with no problem on GeForce Now. So for me on the Steam Deck, between saving battery life, getting a really good experience when it comes to the visuals, input latency, I'll be playing this game streaming on my deck on the OLED with GeForce Now, because the local experience, unfortunately for this one, just isn't good enough, at least for me, to be able to get into it. But I am having a blast with the game. I've really been waiting on this one. I think it deserves the good reviews that it's been getting. I'm looking forward to jumping into some more, and I'll also be testing the Ally X and Legion Go here shortly. So, alright guys, thanks a lot for coming to check out the video. As always, pretty short and sweet. There's only so much I needed to show here because the game just runs very rough locally here on the deck, but GeForce Now is a great experience if you're someone that wants to jump into cloud gaming. Alright guys, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.